Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a tag video, or should I say tags, as it's double bubble. The first tag is the self-aware reader tag, originated by Courtney Ferriter, but I was tagged by Brian at Bookish. Awfully decent of Brian to think I'm a self-aware reader. One of my answers below will probably be contra to that notion. So these are the prompts. What most draws you into a novel or story and makes you want to keep reading? Plot, characters, well, let me just say I'm completely disinterested in plot and characters, so it's certainly not them. Writing style, atmosphere, or something else. Well, I can either say something else, or this is where I come back to Brian thinking I'm a self-aware reader. I'll know it when I see it, if that makes any sense. I am always on the lookout for interesting forms of fiction. By which I mean the formalisms of fiction, be that how the print is visually arrayed on the page, or you know, such as Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, or how David Markson subverts the notion of fiction by using words from other real life people. So number one for me is always formalism, but you know, a very small percentage of the books I read are formally daring or innovative, so it can't just be that. Like Roz at Scanley dangling around the books, I like ideas in novels. I like to have my eyes opened. I'm not even going to say emotion, an emotional response, although it does happen now and again. Valeria Luiselli's book, The Lost Children Archive, really moved me. And to a certain extent, so did Sophie Ward's Love and Other Thought Experiments. That movie, not quite as much as Luiselli, but so, you know, it could be any of these elements. That's why I'm just going to say something else. 2. What is a convention or trope that will immediately turn you off in your reading experience with a novel or story? I don't really have one, in the sense that, to me, the notion of tropes apply either to plot or characters or relationships. And as I said in my answer to question 1, I'm not really interested in them anyway. I see them as background to the stuff that I'm interested in. I mean, there are only 6 or 7 stories or plots in the world anyway, and everything is sort of, you know, a version of one of those. And what differentiates them, I suppose, are the characters, are the relationships that each author brings to one of those basic plots. But, you know, obviously there's a lot more than 6 character types. But a lot of sort of character construction is sort of by the numbers, is rote. You know, I've seen authors on Twitter where they sort of, you know, talk about these sort of personality indexes, and they use those to sort of form characters. I mean, that's complete anathema to me. So that comes back really to, go back to question 1, that it's the voice, I think. The voice of any novel is what attracts me to it. Now, that can either be the voice of the narrator, you know, the character, particularly first person, but it can also be the voice of the author. Now, you don't want the author's voice to sort of so overpower the narrative that it's clearly the author talking and not their characters, except a few very skillful books that do that. So I'm not really troubled by tropes, although I will say 2 years prior to this one, I read 5 books which had scenes of humans having sex with dogs, including Houellebecq, Jonathan Meades, Curtis White, all authors I love. And it just seemed very gratuitous to me. And there was a whole raft of them, as I say. I think Alex Phoebe's Lucia also had a scene that involved that, and that went on to win the Republic of Consciousness Prize. So that's a trope I could do without. Unfortunately, this year I've not read any books that have dog-human sex. Hi, Mark from the future here, just a mere 2 days after recording this video. I spoke too soon. So I'm currently reading Dark Spring by Unica Zern, and yes, there is a scene involving dogs and little girls and sex. 3. What most appeals to you when reading non-fiction and makes you want to keep reading? I think for me the battle is what makes me pick up a non-fiction book in the first place, because I don't read much non-fiction. I've said it before, it's about 17% of my annual readings non-fiction, and as a writer some of that is going to be relevant to what I write as sort of research, although not much. So really the battle for me is, am I interested enough in this subject to want to read about it? So last year I read 2 books on the science of sound. This year reading 2 books on insomnia. What other? I'm just trying to think of other sort of batches of books. I can't think of any at the moment. But so given that, it's not how the book is written that makes me want to pick it up, or to keep going through it. Which comes to the next prompt, which is, what is a conventional or trope in non-fiction that will turn you off in your reading experience? So I do have experiences of this where a thesis is offered, not necessarily in a formal way at the beginning saying this is my thesis, but it's there, even if it's only to sort of, hold the book together. And the book, crunchingly goes on to fail to deliver any commentary or proof or evidence or even argument about that thesis. It's almost as though it ignores that thesis. So I read a book on British anarchism, sort of its roots back to sort of, even goes as far back as sort of Druidic culture and stuff like that. And, I thought this was going to be a really interesting book. And it proceeded to neglect any kind of analysis and just to pay off old political scores, which is most unsatisfactory. And another book I read was by Anna MacDonald. It was a book of essays in which she put quite an interesting thesis. But then the essays were very individualistic. I don't know if they were like sort of each one was published in a different place, but they didn't come together to prove or disprove her thesis. They were interesting, don't get me wrong, it was an interesting read, but I just thought the thesis that was suggested at the beginning was really sort of gratuitous, and it didn't need to be there. It didn't, I think it's publishers who feel there needs to be some sort of thread to wrap it up all together. 5, would you say you read more for pleasure and enjoyment or more to learn and exercise your brain? Well, for me, exercising my brain and learning more are pleasure. I love discovering new words in books. I know a lot of people get really annoyed by having to put the book down and go to a dictionary or look it up online. Not me. I mean, I love that. And yeah, it takes me out of the flow of the book, but I think for me, it's a higher reward to learn a new word, because I'm a writer and I may very well employ that word. So, for example, a writer like Alexander Theroux, he of Darkenville's Cat, Adultery, Three Wogs, really difficult writer because, you have to look up words on virtually every page. And some of them are neologisms that he's coined, so you can't find them in a dictionary, just to compound, you're breaking away from the text to look at something up and it's not even there. But, I love being stretched, and that's why I come back to part of my answer to question 1 about ideas. I like discovering new ideas, or I like being made to think in a different way about an idea I had previously held sacrosanct. All of that is inherently pleasurable to me. 6, which type of books do you like to rate more highly and enjoy more overall? Brain candy, which are pleasure enjoyment books, or brain protein, learning exercise books? Well, I have to say protein in books and candy in food for me. 7, do you have a sense early on of whether or not the book you're reading will be a 5-star read or a book you really like? Has a book ever surprised you in this regard? Now, this is a really interesting question. Often I start a book and I think, yeah, this is great, it's going to be a 5-star read for me. And more often than not, they drop off a cliff. Now, I've seen other people like Brian and Roz sort of say they feel that part of this is so much focus and attention goes on the honing of the start of a novel, because the chances are someone browsing in a bookshop will pick it up and read the first page, and it's got to suck them in, lure them in. Now, that may well be true, and it's certainly true of short story collections where the best short story is always placed first. But it's not true. I don't think it's only that. I think evidence of really strong openings and then dropping off a cliff, I think are actually testament to the fact that the idea that the ideas that the writer thought going to make a good book actually probably couldn't sustain the weight. And when you're first struck by an idea or a synthesis of ideas for your book, very often that's accompanied with a strong central image or a strong sense of character, and And I think the author is familiar with those and therefore sets them down on the page, almost ready formed from there. You know, it's come straight out of their head onto the page. It's the rest of the craft of making a sort of plot and a story and character development out of all of that. They're less sure about, and they have to discover on their way, and is, I think, sort of has less rigour about it. Not through any laziness or fault of the writer, I just think it's less well fully formed. So I think it's more, for me, it's more to do with that rather than all the attention goes on the opening of the book. I will say that there are some writers who do openings fantastically. So, for example, I've just finished Don DeLillo's The Silence. When I read it, chapter 1, it had 5-star written all over it. Because Don DeLillo does openings really well. There's the mass Mooney wedding in the start of Mao 2. There's the home run, the shot heard around the world at the start of his book Underworld. And there's the start in here. I mean, they're brilliant. They suck you right in. And they're supreme acts of writing, fiction writing. But the problem with those other two books sustain it because DeLillo's a great writer. This doesn't, because the size of it, it's a sketch. It's a prolonged sketch. And it can't sustain the weight that, you know, of what he's set up in the, which is a shame. Considering books that you've rated 5 stars in the past, do you think you would feel the same way about them now? Why or why not? Now, again, a really interesting question for me. I think if I've read, well, first of all, I knowingly rate imperfect books 5 stars because they've given me something major. Even if there's a whole, the book has its flaws, there's something that has come out of the book sort of blown my mind in some way. And I think the ones that do that through their formalist sort of experimentations, such as David Markson, such as Ben Marcus, who, although his is with language more than formalism, they will always remain 5 stars because I will never cease to be amazed at how they do what they do. I think if I really like a book because of its story or its character or the central character's voice or something, I think they're going to be harder to sustain as 5-star reads. So, for example, a book I haven't even reviewed yet, Parakeet by Marie-Helene Bertino. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. I will stand by that when I come to review it. But if I reread it, I don't think it would nearly enthuse me as much as it did first time round. It's a quirky central character, it's a quirky voice, and I like it. But I think if I read it a second time, it would drag, it would pull. So, as I say, I think if it's a formalist or a linguistic thing that makes me give it 5 stars, then that will always stay at that level. Whereas I think if it was just, this was a good read, this was a good book, I enjoyed it, I enjoyed the character, I enjoyed the plot, less likely so. And you know, I only ever reread 2 books a year. I can't allow myself to do more than that because then I'd have less time for reading new stuff. And next year's books have already been chosen, and they're 2 of my favourite books, and I'm going to be interested to see if they hold up. The first is Murakami's Hard-Boiled World and the End of the Universe, which is a plot structure to admire. And I've only read it the once, and I want to read it many years later next year to see if you know how he does it, how he pulls it off, whether it's a complete bolt from the blue by the end, or whether he's actually laid the. And you know, it was when I read it first time around, it was a complete bolt from the blue. It's 2 different plots, different characters in different genres, and they end up intertwined, and I never saw that coming, and I just want to see how he does it. So I now know the twist, as it were, so you know, will that diminish my enjoyment? I don't think so. I think I'm going to marvel at how he does it, whether he's laid the seeds all throughout or whether it is sort of almost a Deus Ex Machina, but a very, very credible one. And the other is William Burroughs' Cities of the Red Night, which is my favourite Burroughs book. Again, I've only read it once. I've only read most books once. And, you know, I know Burroughs' style, so that's not going to be new to me. I just really enjoyed it at the time. Will it hold up? Also, you know, it was very much sort of predicting the sort of sex plague that was AIDS before it sort of broke on our consciousness. will that still hold up now that we've been through AIDS and now that we're going through another pandemic now? So I'm interested to see whether I still rate that 5-star, whether it's still my favourite Burroughs novel. So there you have it. That was my response to the self-aware reader tag. Thanks to Courtney and to Brian. And I'm not going to tag anyone because I know a lot of people have done this. So on to the next one. So this is the anti-TBR tag, which I haven't been tagged, but I saw on Matthew Sharappa's channel. And it's not a tag about sort of being hostile to be read piles of books. It's more about sort of considering books that you would never read, books that would never make it onto your TBR's pile. So, number 1, a popular book everyone loves that you have no interest in reading. Well, I'm going for Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell trinity of books. No reflection on Ms. Mantell, but I'm completely, my degree is in history. I hate historical fiction. I had a gut full of history at university. Historical fiction, to my mind, I've said it before, I'm prepared to be shot down, is either good fiction and bad history, or bad fiction and good history, because academic history is very dry. And you're not allowed in academic history to talk about the personalities of the prime movers. And of course there's a whole tranche of history that denies the significance of prime movers, puts it more down to mass movements of people, class, all that sort of stuff. So, good fiction, good historical fiction, to me is just fiction set in the past, even when it uses real life characters or characters from history. Because we're not allowed to consider their personalities and their motivations in history, to immediately put them into literature, that's exactly what you have to bring to make it literature, to make it, fiction, their personalities and their characters. So it's a contradiction. You can't have both. So I've never read historical fiction, and from what I can tell, Hilary Mantel is a supreme stylist. She's a wonderful writer. And I'm sure she's done her research. I'm sure the facts as we know them about Cromwell are there. But there's anything that she has imagined is bad history. I know this is a really small, literal interpretation, but that's just the way I feel. 2, a classic book or author you don't have an interest in reading. All classics. They just don't speak to me, I'm afraid. I'm very much about the contemporary. I'm very much about fiction interrogating our modern world, not in the search of truth. I don't believe fiction could deliver truth except in the emotional reaction in the reader. That's the only truth I think fiction can supply. I'm interested in how fiction delivers fiction so that we go around better able to recognise fictions in our everyday world. 3, an author whose books you have no interest in reading. Right, this is multi-layered for me, and it's going to bring on the haters. And that writer is Sally Rooney. It may not be her fault that her books are described as millennial relationship books. That may be her marketing department. But I have no interest, it's not that I'm not interested in millennials. I have no interest in any categorising of people by groups that is done by marketers, which millennials and boomers and all of that nonsense is. I mean, those are labels just to enable people to market stuff at us. As I say, that may not be her fault, but it strikes me as being exclusive. I am older than the millennials. Am I excluded? Obviously, it would be up to me to make my own, judgment on that. But I feel excluded already. I don't want to just write for people my age, my ethnicity, my class, etc., etc., etc. And as I say, that may be unfair to Ms. Rooney, but that's how she's been marketed to the likes of me. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't know if anyone else has seen this. There's an extraordinary YouTube video of her talking about Marxism and sort of implying that it has a great influence in her writing. If anyone's read Sally Rooney and feels that, they know what she's talking about in that respect, that Marxism does underpin her writing, please let me know and explain. I've read another Marxist writer China Miéville. And Marxism doesn't really come into his work. I mean, it came into the one he wrote about the Russian Revolution, which was non-fiction. I mean, he writes sort of new science, new weird and urban fantasy and all this sort of stuff, and they're not overtly Marxist books. But I have at least read him, and I have a love-hate relationship with his work. Some one or two I really love, and most I really, really hate, to the extent as they're sort of throw against the wall type of books in despair. And I've actually stopped reading him now. You know, I know a lot about Marxism. I studied it at university, and in my new book next year, one of these stories is a fairy tale retold in sort of Marxist style. So I'm not a Marxist, but I have studied it. So I'm absolutely bemused by this whole Sally Rooney talking about Marxism thing. Now here's the catch though. An as yet unpublished book of mine I have called Solipsistic Conversations with Close Friends, and you may recognise the echoes with Sally Rooney's book Conversations with Friends. I haven't read it. If and when that book gets a publishing deal, I will, in all likelihood, have to read Sally Rooney's book, because I'm going to get questioned. You go, oh, are you deliberately titling your book with echoes of Sally Rooney? And at the moment, no, because I haven't read it. I have no idea what's in her book. It perfectly fitted my book, and yes, of course, I was aware of the title of her book, so I was quite content that my book did resonate against that title. But in terms of the content of what my book is doing against the content of hers, I've no idea. I haven't read it. So having said that, I would never read her. I may well have to end up reading at least that book. So wait and see on that one. A problematic author whose books you have no interest in reading. Well, normally I think the interpretation of this would be the writer's books are problematic because of representation or you know, whatever. For me, my answer to this is a writer he himself is problematic. I've no idea what's in his books because I never read them, and that is Jonathan Franzen. And the reason that I'm so hostile to Jonathan Franzen is, to me, he strikes me as the ultimate exemplar of someone who's made it and pulled up the ladder after them and just cocks a snook at everyone left below, scrabbling for the fast disappearing lowest rungs. And I hate him for that. I've no idea what his literature's like, but he is so sort of smug and, you know, pleased with himself that he's made it. I can't forgive that. I would rather read Celine, who we know was a terrible human being, you know, collaborated with the Nazis and actually produced screeds and tracts of anti-Semitism for them. I mean, he was that horrible, but I'd be more prepared to read him than Jonathan Franzen, so go figure. 4. An author you have read a couple of books from and have decided their books are not for you. I'm a bit sad about this because this is a booktube darling. I've read 2 of her 3 books, and that is Samantha Schweblin. The first I read was Fever Dream, and the second, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was something like Idiocy or something. And I just couldn't get with either of them. I just couldn't make head or tail of what she was trying to do. I mean, they're perfectly well written. They should be in my wheelhouse, a sort of experimental in language and sort of structure on the page, not visual structure. But I guess the notion of a fever dream just doesn't compute with me. And the one about the mother and the daughter who basically hate each other, you just want to knock both their heads together. Yeah, so I'm afraid I won't be reading any more Samantha Schweblin. 5, a genre you have no interest in, or a genre you tried to get into and couldn't. All genre. I can't be doing with books that have rules that they are supposed to follow, and if they don't follow those books in an experimental way, at least within the confines of their genre, they get, you know, attacked for not obeying the rules. Yeah, I mean, I do like science fiction, but I guess it is a genre, but I don't regard it as a genre, because to me science fiction is using projections into the future to convey our own current day anxieties. I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and again, something I've written in my upcoming novel next year. So I like science fiction, but what I don't like are all the subgenres, such as science fiction, fantasy, new weird, steampunk, space opera. I mean, these just drive me to distraction. They belittle the book, they belittle the author, they belittle the reader, to my mind. So no, I don't really read genre. And I will say that the genre of literary fiction is not a genre, it's a fallacy. It's basically all the books that can't be put in some other genre. So they call it literary fiction. There's no reason why a so-called genre book can't have the highest literary values, in the same way there's no reason why a literary fiction book can't be a real page-turner with a plot that drives you through the action. They tend not to be. They tend to be exclusive. Language and style and description in literary fiction, and plot within the genre. They don't have to be, but they tend to be, and that's sad. One book which does cross that is Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, or Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. Now, the interesting thing about House of Leaves is, when I read it and loved it, I thought it was a supreme work of literary fiction. I'll use that label loosely. What I didn't conceive for one moment is that it's a work of horror supernatural. And I only realised this when reading what other people on Goodreads had to say of the book. Never entered my mind for one moment, but I can totally see why they think that. And it's absolutely legitimate. But interestingly, the same way as I never felt it was a genre work, they never felt it was a literary fiction book. So to me, all of this just proves that the whole thing's a nonsense and we don't need labels. 6, a book you have bought but will never read. This can be a book you have unhauled or returned to the library and read. Well, I have a couple. The first is this, American Dirt, which I took receipt of just before the whole hoo-ha broke about it. And I read the hoo-ha and I found myself on the side of the plaintiffs, and I'm not going to read it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I mean, I don't know. The other is this. So I paid a subscription to an independent bookshop in London for a year's supply of books, one per month, so 12 books in all. And I filled out a profile of what type of books I like. But I never know what I'm going to get. And this book was sent to me 2 or 3 months ago. It's called Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. I'm just going to read you the blurb. In a house in a wood, Ada and her father that live peacefully, tending to their garden and the wildlife in it. Not a great start for me. They are not human, though. Okay, as long as they're not bloody supernatural or folklore. Ada was made by her father from the ground, a unique patch of earth with birthing and healing properties. So they are folklore. But perhaps he didn't get her quite right. They spend their days healing the local human folk, the Cures, which we saw done in one of the female characters in what's her name, Zuma's Red Clocks. But anyway, they spend their days healing the local human folk, the Cures, who visit them guardedly with their ailments. When Ada embarks on a relationship with a local Cure named Samson, she is forced to choose between her old life with her father and her new one with her human lover. Her decision will uproot the town and the ground itself forever. I can't imagine on the profile I gave them how they ever sent me this book. Again, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with it. I'm certainly not going to read it. God almighty. 7, a series you have no interest in reading. Stop there. I have no interest in reading a series. An author should be able to say all they need to say in one book. I get it. Series, people fall in love with characters and they want to see more of that character. I get it. It works in genre books, detective, fiction or whatever. But for me, because I have read one or two, I've read some of the Jane Nesbo, Hattie Hall books, for example, and each time Nesbo has to reveal something new about Harry Hall's character to keep it fresh and alive. But then you wonder, well, why wasn't that character trait on show, throughout the preceding books? So, for example, I read The Leopard, which I think was his best. Not The Leopard, sorry, The Snowman, which I thought was his best. And then I think The Leopard was the next one that came out, and I read it. And The Leopard starts with Harry Hall having been so sort of overcome and overwrought by the experience in The Snowman, where people close to him were under threat from the murderer, that he starts The Leopard as a heroin addict. That's how he's coped with the trauma. And I'm thinking, we had no sign of this previously, that he was, an alcoholic drowning out his sorrows and his fears and his anxieties, yeah, you can just about see that. But this is full on heroin addiction. And not only that, he kicks the habit in 2 weeks when the new case... I mean, it's just... That's my point. That's why series are cretinous on the whole. Number 8. A new release you have no interest in reading. Nick Hornby's got a new book out, came out in September, called Just Like You. Sounds like a romantic comedy. I used to really like Nick Hornby, but yeah, I'm no interested in reading him now. He seems to have sort of gone mainstream in the same way as Tony Parsons went mainstream. They were interesting authors when they started out, but they seem to have been sort of smoothed out by the lure of lucre, filthy lucre. So there you have it. I don't know who originated this tag. I don't think it was someone in our corner of BookTube. So make of that what you will. Thanks very much. Till next time.